The Silent Watchers. The observation platform drifted in the darkness beyond Neptune's orbit, a tiny speck of human engineering against the infinite canvas of space. Commander Elena Vasquez had spent 3 years stationed at Deep Space Monitoring Station Argus, watching the stellar void for threats that most people believed would never come. Her days consisted of analyzing sensor data, maintaining equipment, and sending routine reports back to Earth that no one seemed to read with any urgency. The work was monotonous, but Elena understood its importance. Humanity had spread across the solar system in the past 50 years, establishing colonies on Mars, mining operations in the asteroid belt, and research outposts on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Someone needed to watch the darkness beyond. Even if that darkness had remained empty for all of recorded history, the gravitational anomaly appeared on her. Sensors at 0347 hours on a Tuesday that would be remembered throughout human history. Elena was conducting her standard morning system check when the detection grid registered a distortion in spacetime that made her coffee cup freeze halfway to her lips. The readings were impossible. Something massive was approaching from interstellar space, creating gravitational waves that her instruments should not have been able to detect at such extreme range. She ran the diagnostics 3 times, certain that her equipment had malfunctioned. The computer insisted that everything was working perfectly. The anomaly was real, and it was getting stronger. Elena triggered the emergency alert protocol and initiated long-range scanning sweeps across every available frequency. The results appeared on her display screens in cascading waves of data that made her blood run cold. 15,000 individual contacts, each one generating energy signatures that dwarfed anything in Earth's arsenal. The objects were decelerating from relativistic speeds with a precision that spoke of technology far beyond human capabilities. They were warships, and they were heading directly toward Earth's solar system with clear hostile intent. Elena's hands shook as she composed a priority transmission that would reach Earth Command in 4 hours. Humanity's peaceful expansion into space was about to end in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Admiral Marcus. Chun received Elena's transmission while reviewing deployment schedules for the United Defense Fleet in his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He had served in Earth's military for 32 years, rising through the ranks during humanity's expansion era when the greatest threats came from asteroid impacts and equipment failures rather than hostile aliens. His fleet consisted of 340 ships designed primarily for patrol duties and disaster response. They carried weapons because military vessels always did, but those weapons had never been fired in anger. Chun read Elena's report twice before, activating the emergency communication channels that would summon the United Defense Council for an immediate session. The council chamber filled within hours as representatives arrived from every major government and colony in the solar system. President Thomas Adeyemi of the African Federation called the meeting to order, his voice steady despite the fear that showed in everyone's eyes. Director Liu Wei of the Asian Coalition presented the intelligence data that had been gathered since Elena's initial report. The alien fleet had been designated the Drexian Armada based on transmission signatures that human linguists were still struggling to decode. Their technology operated on principles that violated several laws of physics as humanity understood them. Their weapons could generate temperatures hotter than stellar cores and manipulate gravitational fields with surgical precision. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo sat in the observer section, her security clearance allowing her access to council sessions, despite her role as a civilian researcher. She directed the Neural Sciences Division at the Antarctic Research Facility, conducting studies that most council members knew nothing about. Her work had been classified at the highest levels for 5 years, hidden from public knowledge because its implications were too dangerous to reveal without proper safeguards. She listened to the military briefings with growing dread, knowing that conventional weapons would prove useless against an enemy this advanced. Humanity needed something revolutionary, and her research might provide exactly that, though the cost of using it remained uncertain. The alien broadcast reached every communication device on Earth and across all human colonies simultaneously at 1800 hours Greenwich Mean Time. The transmission bypassed all security protocols and encryption systems, appearing on military channels and civilian networks with equal ease. The voice that spoke was translated into every human language perfectly, suggesting that the aliens had been studying humanity for some time before revealing themselves. Emperor Thaxron of the Drexian Imperium delivered his message with the casual arrogance of someone who had conquered hundreds of worlds across thousands of years. His empire stretched across 12 sectors of the galaxy, encompassing civilizations that made humanity look like children playing with toys. The terms were simple and absolute. Earth had 48 hours to surrender all military forces, dismantle all orbital defenses, and prepare for integration into the Drexian Imperium. Human populations would be relocated to designated worlds, where they would serve the Empire in whatever capacity their limited abilities allowed. Resistance would result in the complete sterilization of every human world, turning Earth and its colonies into lifeless rocks drifting through space as warnings to other species. The Emperor's tone suggested he had made this speech many times before to many different civilizations. Some had surrendered immediately, others had fought briefly before being crushed, but the outcome was always the same. The Drexian Imperium did not lose. Admiral Chun assembled his senior staff within the hour, knowing that his defense fleet faced impossible odds, but understanding that surrender was not an option humanity would accept. Captain Maria Rodriguez commanded the carrier group that represented Earth's most powerful mobile force. Commander David Kimothy led the fast attack squadrons designed for rapid response missions. General Quayne Numa coordinated with ground forces on Earth and Mars, preparing defensive positions that everyone knew would be overrun within days if the aliens reached planetary surfaces. They reviewed tactical simulations that all ended in total defeat, searching desperately for any advantage they might exploit against an enemy with overwhelming technological superiority. Dr. Okonkwo requested an emergency meeting with President Adeyemi and Admiral Chun, using her highest-level security codes to ensure the session remained completely confidential. She met them in a secure bunker beneath the council chambers, where electromagnetic shielding prevented any surveillance or eavesdropping. The Neural Resonance Project had been her life's work for the past decade, building on discoveries that challenged every assumption about human consciousness and cognitive potential. Her research had revealed that human brains possessed latent capabilities that evolution had never fully activated. Quantum-level processes that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness, but could be enhanced through specific electromagnetic stimulation. The technology worked by creating synchronized neural patterns across multiple human minds, essentially linking them into a distributed consciousness network. Test subjects experienced dramatic increases in reaction speed, pattern recognition, and intuitive problem-solving. More remarkably, they developed what could only be described as limited precognition, their enhanced brains processing probability calculations so rapidly that they appeared to predict future events. The effect scaled exponentially with the number of connected individuals. 10 people working in neural synchronization performed better than 100 working independently. The potential military applications were obvious and terrifying, which was why the project had remained classified. President Adeyemi listened to Dr. Okonkwo's explanation with a mixture of hope and horror. The technology had never been tested on a large scale, and the potential side effects remained largely unknown. Previous experiments suggested that prolonged neural synchronization might cause permanent changes to brain structure, though whether those changes would be beneficial or harmful could not be determined without extensive testing. The ethical implications of forcibly altering human consciousness were staggering, but the alternative was extinction. He authorized Dr. Okonkwo to begin preparations for full-scale deployment, knowing that this decision might transform humanity in ways that could never be reversed. The Drexian armada crossed into the solar system 40 hours after their initial broadcast, their formation spreading across millions of kilometers as they prepared to demonstrate their power. Emperor Thaxron had ordered his fleet commanders to destroy Mars' orbital infrastructure as their opening move, providing Earth with a clear demonstration of what resistance would accomplish. The human colonies on Mars's moons had been evacuated, but the orbital stations represented decades of construction and billions in resources. They were also the primary manufacturing centers for Earth's defense fleet, and their destruction would cripple humanity's already minimal military capabilities. Asterisk. Commander Elena Vasquez watched from her distant monitoring station as the Drexian dreadnoughts opened fire with weapons that turned space itself into a weapon. Gravitational beams twisted Mars's orbital stations into twisted metal sculptures. 4 secondary explosions tore them apart completely. The destruction was clinical and efficient, demonstrating technological superiority so complete that resistance seemed pointless. Elena transmitted the tactical data back to Earth Command, providing intelligence that might help human forces survive a few minutes longer in the coming battle. She knew her monitoring station would be destroyed eventually, but every moment she remained operational was another moment. Earth had to prepare for the impossible fight ahead. Admiral Chun gave the order to deploy the defense fleet, knowing that he was sending his people to almost certain death, but understanding that humanity's survival depended on buying time for Dr. Okonkwo's project to be implemented. 340 ships accelerated toward intercept positions, their crews trained and ready despite knowing the terrible odds they faced. Captain Rodriguez led the carrier group from the bridge of the UDS Valiant. Her fighter squadrons prepared for launch at her command. Commander Kimothy positioned his fast attack vessels to exploit any tactical opportunities that might arise. Though simulations suggested the Drexians would have no exploitable weaknesses, Dr. Okonkwo worked frantically in her Antarctic facility, preparing the neural resonance transmitters that had been installed secretly across Earth and its colonies over the past 2 years. The activation sequence would take 6 hours to complete, during which human forces would have to survive against an enemy that could destroy them in minutes. Her staff worked around the clock, preparing the final calibrations, testing equipment that had never been used at anything approaching this scale. The fate of humanity rested on technology that existed at the bleeding edge of theoretical science, and Sarah Okonkwo carried the weight of that responsibility with grim determination. In 18 hours, humanity would either transcend its limitations or cease to exist entirely. Asterisk the Awakening. The battle for Mars orbit began at 0600 hours, when the first elements of Earth's defense fleet engaged Drexian forward scouts. Captain James Okoro commanded the destroyer UDS Lagos, leading a squadron of 20 fast attack vessels against alien cruisers that outmassed his entire group by factors of hundreds. His tactical display showed enemy ships closing at velocities that should have been impossible for vessels of their size, their energy shields glowing with power outputs that exceeded anything human technology could generate. Okoro gave the order to fire, knowing his missiles would likely prove ineffective, but determined to make the aliens pay some price for their invasion. The human weapons struck Drexian shields and vanished in flashes of annihilated matter, their nuclear warheads releasing energies that the alien defenses absorbed without visible strain. Return fire came in the form of plasma beams that cut through human shields like sunlight through fog, vaporizing armor and hull plating with horrifying efficiency. The UDS Nairobi exploded when its reactor containment failed under alien bombardment, taking 40 crew members with it in an expanding sphere of superheated gas. The UDS Cairo lasted seconds longer before suffering the same fate. Its emergency beacon cut short as the ship ceased to exist. Admiral Chun watched the battle unfold from his command center on Luna, receiving casualty reports that came too quickly to process individually. His defense fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that treated human vessels as minor obstacles rather than genuine threats. Simulations had predicted this outcome, but witnessing the actual destruction of ships and crews he had served with for decades made the abstract horror terribly real. He maintained his professional composure while issuing tactical orders that might save a few lives, buying precious minutes for Dr. Okonkwo's team to complete their preparations. Every human ship that survived another engagement was another small victory against impossible odds. Captain Maria Rodriguez launched her fighter squadrons from the UDS Valiant, sending 400 small craft against Drexian capital ships that bristled with point defense weapons. The fighters moved with the skill that intensive training had provided, executing combat maneuvers that pushed their pilots to the limits of human endurance. Their torpedoes and particle beams struck alien hulls with concentrated firepower that should have penetrated any defensive system. The Drexian shields flickered slightly under the assault before stabilizing, having absorbed damage that would have destroyed human battleships without showing meaningful degradation. The alien response was devastating and immediate. Antimatter missiles tracking human fighters with perfect accuracy and detonating in patterns that turned entire squadrons into brief stars against the darkness. General Quaim Kruma coordinated planetary defenses from his command bunker beneath Addis Ababa, preparing surface installations that would activate if the alien fleet reached Earth. His missile batteries could strike targets in low orbit, and his ground forces numbered in the millions. But everyone understood that conventional warfare would prove meaningless against an enemy that could bombard planets from positions beyond human weapons range. He reviewed evacuation protocols that would move civilian populations to deep shelters, buying them perhaps a few extra hours of life if the Drexians chose to glass Earth's surface. The general had fought in 3 regional conflicts during his career, but nothing had prepared him for combat on this scale. Against enemies this powerful Dr. Sarah Okonkwo initiated the neural resonance activation sequence at 0800 hours, triggering transmitters that blanketed Earth and its colonies with carefully calibrated electromagnetic pulses. The signals were invisible and imperceptible to normal human senses, but they resonated with quantum processes occurring in every human brain within range. The effect built gradually as neural patterns across millions of minds began synchronizing with each other, creating connections that transcended normal space and time. Sarah monitored biometric data from thousands of volunteer subjects who wore sensors that tracked their brain activity during activation. The readings climbed steadily toward target parameters while she held her breath and hoped desperately that her calculations were correct. Captain Okoro felt the change wash over him like a wave of clear water, his consciousness suddenly expanding beyond the normal boundaries of his skull. He could perceive his crew members' thoughts and feelings as extensions of his own awareness, their individual minds remaining distinct but also merging into a collective intelligence that operated on levels he had never imagined possible. His tactical officer's analysis of enemy movements flowed directly into his understanding without requiring verbal communication. His weapons officer's targeting calculations appeared in his mind as intuitive certainties rather than mathematical abstractions. The alien cruiser that had been pursuing his destroyer became predictable and manageable, its attack patterns obvious before they manifested in physical reality. The neural synchronization spread through Earth's defense fleet like lightning, jumping between clouds, touching pilots and crew members who suddenly found themselves thinking faster than light itself could travel. Commander Kimothy experienced the transformation while evading Drexian plasma fire, his reflexes accelerating to levels that turned milliseconds into subjective minutes. He could see the alien weapons charging before they fired, perceive the trajectories they would follow, and calculate evasive maneuvers that exploited quantum probability fluctuations to avoid destruction. His squadron moved with perfect coordination because they shared a single consciousness distributed across 30 individual ships, each vessel acting as an extension of one unified strategic intelligence. Admiral Chun felt his awareness expand to encompass every human vessel in his fleet simultaneously, perceiving the battle from hundreds of perspectives at once without experiencing confusion or cognitive overload. His 340 ships became extensions of his will, responding to strategic decisions before he consciously formed them. He could anticipate Drexian movements by analyzing probability streams that showed every possible future outcome branching from present circumstances. The enemy fleet that had seemed invincible minutes earlier now appeared manageable because human forces could predict and counter every tactic before it fully developed. The Drexian commanders noticed the change in human combat effectiveness immediately and reported the anomaly to Emperor Thaxron with growing concern. Human vessels that should have been destroyed were evading weapons fire with impossible precision, their movements suggesting precognitive awareness rather than simple tactical skill. Human missiles were following trajectories that exploited microscopic gaps in Drexian shielding, finding vulnerabilities that should have been undetectable to primitive sensors. Most disturbing, human forces were coordinating their attacks with a precision that suggested hive mind intelligence, operating across vast distances without communication lagged out Captain Rodriguez's fighter squadrons, reformed and attacked again. But this time, their assault demonstrated capabilities that violated everything the Drexians understood about warfare. Her pilots moved in patterns that existed partially outside normal spacetime, their quantum-enhanced consciousness allowing them to execute maneuvers in probability space rather than just physical dimensions. Their weapons struck with perfect timing to overwhelm local shield generators through synchronized impacts that created cascading failures in Drexian defensive systems. The alien cruiser that had destroyed 3 human capital ships minutes earlier suddenly found itself under devastating assault from fighters that could predict its defensive responses and counter them before they occurred. Commander Kimothy led his fast attack squadron against a Drexian dreadnought that served as the enemy fleet's command node, his neural-enhanced tactical awareness identifying it as a critical vulnerability in their formation. His ships moved with choreographed precision that made them appear to be parts of a single organism rather than independent vessels. Their concentrated fire struck the dreadnought's shield generators in perfect sequence, each impact timed to exploit the quantum fluctuations created by previous strikes. The alien shields collapsed under the assault that normal human forces could never have coordinated, exposing the dreadnought's hull to weapons that suddenly became effective against unprotected armor. Captain Okoro's destroyer executed an attack run that would have been suicidal minutes earlier, but now appeared merely dangerous rather than impossible. His quantum-enhanced awareness showed him exactly when the Drexian cruiser's weapons would cycle through their recharge sequences, creating windows measured in microseconds when counterattack was safe. His missiles penetrated alien shields, weakened by previous impacts from other human vessels, whose attacks had been perfectly timed to support his assault. The Drexian cruiser suffered critical damage to its primary reactor when human weapons found vulnerable points that conventional targeting systems would never have identified. The tide of battle shifted as human forces demonstrated capabilities that defied the Drexian Imperium's 1,000 years of military experience. Emperor Thaxron watched tactical displays that showed his fleet taking casualties from an enemy that should have been crushed within the first hour of engagement. Human vessels were surviving encounters that should have destroyed them, coordinating attacks across distances that made instant communication impossible, and exploiting vulnerabilities in Drexian technology that his engineers insisted did not exist. The situation was unprecedented in Imperial history, suggesting that humanity possessed capabilities his intelligence had completely failed to detect. Admiral Chun pressed his advantage ruthlessly, directing his quantum-synchronized fleet against Drexian formations that suddenly appeared vulnerable rather than invincible. His ships moved with purpose that transcended normal tactical doctrine, each vessel contributing to an overall strategy that emerged from their collective consciousness rather than hierarchical command structure. They targeted enemy command ships and logistics vessels, disrupting the careful coordination that Drexian doctrine required for effective large-scale operations. Human casualties continued mounting because the technological gap remained enormous. But now the aliens were also dying in numbers. That made their invasion suddenly appear questionable rather than inevitable. Dr. Okonkwo monitored the battle results while analyzing biometric data from binaural synchronized human forces. The activation had succeeded beyond her most optimistic projections, transforming Earth's defense fleet into something that transcended normal human capabilities. However, her instruments also showed concerning trends in brain activity patterns among synchronized individuals. Their neural structures were changing in real time, rewiring themselves to accommodate the quantum consciousness that now flowed through them. Whether these changes would be permanent and what long-term effects they might have remained unknown. But Sarah understood that humanity had crossed a threshold that could never be reversed. Drexian fleet began withdrawing toward this outer solar system after 6 hours of combat that had cost them 12 capital ships and hundreds of smaller vessels. Emperor Thaxron had ordered the retreat personally after accepting that his forces faced an enemy whose capabilities defied rational explanation. The humans had somehow transformed themselves during the battle, developing abilities that suggested technologies more advanced than anything the Imperium possessed. He would regroup, analyze what had occurred, and develop new strategies before attempting another assault. The conquest of Earth had become complicated in ways that threatened his empire's carefully maintained reputation for invincibility. Captain Okoro stood on his destroyer's bridge watching the alien fleet disappear toward deep space, feeling the quantum consciousness that connected him to millions of other humans, pulsing with shared triumph and relief. Humanity had won its first battle against impossible odds, but everyone understood that the victory was incomplete. The Drexians would return better prepared, and Earth's forces had suffered terrible casualties despite their transformation. More concerning were the questions about what humanity had become during those desperate hours. Dr. Okonkwo's technology had saved them from extinction, but it had also changed them in ways that no one fully understood. The war was far from over, and humanity itself had been transformed into something new and uncertain, caught between its evolutionary past and an unpredictable quantum future.